Today we're going to look at another example of global governance strategies that were put in place in another case study. The case study is the West African country of Mali, and most of the case study will focus on this group. They're in the picture. They are the Tuareg group, and they are a nomadic herdsmen that live in the north of the country, and their kind of challenge to the state authority. This is part of the Section 4A of the OCR A-Level, and this is looking at impact of governance on sovereignty and territorial integrity in the LIDC. So I mentioned that group, the Tuaregs. They are an ethnic group that live in Mali, Niger, Nigeria, Algeria and Burkina Faso. And one of the reasons why they have a challenge to sovereignty in Mali is because they are separated across these countries. In the scramble for Africa, European colonial powers split this region up without really looking at the ethnic groups that were involved in that area. That unfortunately leads to problems because you get groups like the Tuareg group, which are separated across different countries, and they don't necessarily have significant amount of power in some countries, but in other countries they might. And they might have more connection with people living in Niger than the people in their own country and their borders. So this is one of the sources of the challenge to sovereignty, these kind of borders that were put in place that separated this ethnic group. And that means in Mali, the Tuareg group don't have a lot of power, and because of this, in 2012, they actually staged a armed conflict, a kind of rebellion to create their own state that would represent their own interests. They want to create this state called Azawad, and this was the group that did it, the National Movement of the Liberation of Azawad, in the north of the country. And by April 2012, they'd actually controlled enough of this region through military conflict with the government to actually, they called it an independent state, even gave it its own flag. And this disruption actually led to an attempted military coup in the capital, Bamako, which is in the south, where disgruntled government soldiers tried to take over the government because they were disappointed in the way that the government was dealing with this separatist movement in the north. So the Tuaregs trying to separate and create their own state, a real challenge to sovereignty and to the territorial integrity of the country. So we can see that in this time, there's some significant issues going on in Mali that are causing it to be a fragile state. These aren't the only issues. There are other ethnic conflicts ongoing in Mali in different parts of the country. So just below that area that was known as Azawad, is this area called Mopti, and there is ethnic conflict there between two groups, the Dogons and the Fulani, and there is armed conflict between these groups. So we can see that Mali has several large conflicts going on from 2012, which are causing a challenge to the state authority. And it was because of that there had to be an international response. The first response was a state response. The former colony of Mali was France, and they sent troops in 2013 after this attempted military coup. They sent 5,000 troops in total, and it was called Operation Serval, and it was there to add stability, but also part of it was to kind of tackle the insurgency in the north. This was then replaced mainly by a UN peacekeeping mission in April 2013. Long complicated name, but we call it MINUSMA for short. It had a very similar approach to South Sudan. So they put boots on the ground, 9,000 military personnel, 1,000 police, and other kind of international staff that would be part of the UN mission. They had a similar remit to in South Sudan. They were having to stabilise Mali and protect civilians, re-establishing the state authority, so giving power back to the government, protecting human rights, and then providing humanitarian assistance, so protecting IDPs as they had tried to do in South Sudan. This was all done with the support of wider kind of supranational institutions like African Union, who were there not to provide military or police, but to help mediate negotiations. A bit like the UN High Commission for Refugees did in South Sudan. They were there to mediate with the government and try to get peace talks going. So alongside this, there was the NGO response. Population Services International were one group that offer their support. They were there to do health projects, largely to do with reproduction. So trying to lower the birth rate by giving family planning advice and contraceptive education to add a bit more stability in that area. They CARE were a group that were in South Sudan, but also here in Mali, and they were doing projects to improve food security, so offering education on that, especially in this MOP2 region, which was the region where the two ethnic groups, had been clashing quite a lot. And then the last group, Solidarities International, they were, again, focused on health in the Timbuktu region, and they were trying to offer sanitation and clean water and rebuilding health centres. So these, again, were trying to protect civilians and offer opportunities to civilians, normally what the state would do, but because of lack of state sovereignty, these guys were having to fill those gaps. We're now going to look at how successful all these different strategies were as a combined approach to providing sovereignty in Sudan, in Mali. You could argue that MINUSMA in some ways was really successful up until 2016. It helped establish peaceful elections. It also helped to broker a peace agreement in 2015 between the Tuaregs and the Malian government. This gave the Tuaregs more control, more autonomy in the north. It gave them recognition of local leaders. More of the state budget was going to be spent in their region in the north, and better representation for them in those discussions in the capital politically. So you could argue that there was some success, and I said 2016 because it kind of after that it starts to kind of decline in their success. You can see in these graphs in terms of life expectancy and GDP per capita that there has been improvements, very slow and steady, but Mali has improved its life expectancy even during those conflict areas, and since the conflict areas, the GDP per capita has eventually gone above $2,000 per person. So you could argue that the NGO work has helped there, but also that the increased stability created by the UN has led to economic and health prosperity. However, we've got to look at the other side. We've got to evaluate this properly. Here's some figures from November 2020 that shows you that there are 15,000 UN personnel in Mali at the moment. That means there's more troops and police deployed now than there was in 2013. There's even more French troops still there fighting insurgents. So having this big military presence still there, and the fact that the UN mandate has been extended to 2021 even further, argues that there are still problems here. There's still instability. The fact that there's that many troops needed to control insurgents and conflict shows you that there isn't complete state control because there's more troops than there was before. We've also got to look at the fact that the UN troops are attacked on a regular basis. It's the deadliest UN mission. 209 peacekeepers have been killed since 2013, which was about half the peacekeepers killed in that time since 2013. So it's a significantly dangerous place. And one of the factors that so many peacekeepers have been killed has been the rise of jihadist groups that are linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. These have moved into the north and have kind of using their political agenda to kind of create division in the Sahel region, but particularly in Mali. And it's because there's a lack of state control. These groups can't be controlled. And because of that lack of stability, more instability has been created. They're attacking civilians, they're attacking government officials, they're attacking peacekeepers. So there has been new groups that have formed because the Malian government and the peacekeepers haven't been able to get a proper control over this area. One of the other major things that Mali has been the centre of is because there is this lack of state control and they've got these borders that aren't really well maintained and managed, there has been a huge increase in trafficking, both human trafficking as a source centre and a transit hub, but also it's become a major transport hub for cocaine and drugs. That means because there is a lack of state control, drugs that are being shipped from South America are being transported pretty easily and freely through Mali on the way to Europe. This is a huge problem. It creates more tension, it creates more conflict, and shows you that because the government aren't doing anything about it, that they haven't really got any kind of state control. The last slide I'm going to show you shows you just kind of the situation we're in now. On this graph on the left, it shows you internally displaced people, which after that peace agreement had got below 50,000, but now have increased again to up to 300,000. That shows you that there's still conflict, there's still issues, there's still a lack of state control and the lack of responsibility to protect these citizens. Same for refugees. Much lower figures near that peace agreement time in 2015, but now 50,000. This shows you that even though there was improvements made in that those agreements and made by the UN and the NGOs involved, we can still see there are significant long-term problems to stability and state control and sovereignty in Mali.